He sat smiling in front of a lit birthday cake, surrounded by family. Cameras flashed, toasts were made, and laughter echoed through the Kingsley home. But less than 48 hours later, Harold Kingsley, retired father, grandfather, and self-made millionaire, was dead, bludgeoned in his favorite reading chair. No forced entry, no missing valuables, just a shattered family, and a birthday gift that may have been his death sentence. In the quiet Minneapolis suburb of Edina, the Kingsley family was considered picture-perfect, comfortable, educated, and close-knit. But behind the warmth of family dinners and festive holidays lay hidden rivalries, financial tension, and one son's slow-burning resentment. This is the true story of how a birthday celebration turned into a crime scene, and how the final gift given to a beloved father became the key to his murder. March 4, 2022, was Harold Kingsley's 74th birthday. Friends from his Rotary Club dropped by with cards. Neighbors waved from across the snowy cul-de-sac. But the real celebration took place that evening, in the home Harold had lived in for over 40 years. His daughter Melanie organized a small gathering, nothing too big, just family. His 2 children, Brendan and Melanie, and a few grandchildren. Harold didn't like fuss. But this year something felt different. Slower. He'd battled a recent pneumonia scare. He walked with a cane now. But his eyes were still sharp, and he clutched his old-fashioned glass with the same tight grip that had once sealed business deals worth millions. At the dining table sat his only son, Brendan, 38 years old, twice divorced, a former real estate agent who hadn't held a job in nearly 2 years. Brendan was quiet that night, unusually so. He'd shown up late with an envelope in hand, claiming it was just a small card for his dad. No one knew then that this envelope would be central to a murder investigation. There's a photo police would later study. Harold, grinning beside a cake, his grandchildren singing, his cane propped beside him. Behind him, in the background, Brendan's face is partially blurred. Not smiling. Not singing. Just watching. Detectives would later enlarge that photo and pin it to a corkboard at Edina Police Department. It would become symbolic, how a murderer can blend into the family frame, hiding in plain sight. Harold had always been a meticulous man. He kept physical copies of every will revision, insurance statement, and trust document in a locked cherrywood safe in his study. The only people who knew the combination were Harold and, supposedly, his lawyer. But someone else knew it too. After the party, Melanie helped tidy up while Brendan excused himself early, citing a headache. He left quietly, barely hugging his father goodbye. That night, Harold sat alone in his den, watching an old western, his bourbon half drunk on the side table. His phone showed a final text at 10:43 p.m., a reply to Brendan. "Thanks again, son. Appreciate the card." It would be the last message Harold Kingsley ever sent. When Melanie arrived 2 days later to drop off her father's medication, she found the front door unlocked. That was odd. Harold always locked it, even when he stepped into the backyard. She called out but heard nothing. The den was silent. The faint glow of the TV still flickered. Then she saw him. Harold was slumped in his chair, one hand hanging toward the floor, the other still curled near the armrest. Blood had pooled beneath him, congealed. His temple was crushed, blunt force trauma. A heavy brass statue, one of Harold's prized bookends, lay nearby. There were no signs of a break-in. Nothing stolen. Nothing disturbed, except the cherrywood safe. Its door stood ajar. Within hours, homicide detectives were combing through the house. But it didn't take long for suspicion to turn inward. Melanie, distraught and shaking, told officers that the only recent changes in Harold's life had involved his estate planning. And one person, she noted, hadn't been happy about it. Brendan. 2 months earlier, Harold had quietly altered his will, shifting a large portion of his estate, including the family home and a sizable trust, away from Brendan and toward his grandchildren. He hadn't told his son directly. He'd said he would, when the time is right. Instead, Brendan found out the night of the party. Harold had placed the latest version of the will, unsigned, in the same envelope Brendan handed him at dinner. Inside the birthday card was a note that read, "Dad, if this is how you repay me, you'll regret it." What was meant to be a quiet, dignified end to a celebrated life became a headline-making tragedy. The birthday cake had barely been thrown out before police launched a full-scale murder investigation, and the most damning clues were already inside the house. The betrayal didn't come from a stranger or a thief. It came from blood. From a son. From someone who knew exactly what the final gift would be, and how to turn love into leverage. He was the golden boy once, prom king, honor roll, his father's pride. But by the time Harold Kingsley was killed, Brendan had become a shadow of that memory. jobless, divorced, drowning in debt. Still, he showed up for his father's birthday with a tight smile and a mysterious envelope. To everyone else, he looked like a struggling man trying to do better. But detectives would soon ask, was Brendan trying or planning? Brendan Kingsley once seemed destined for success. In his younger years, he had the kind of charm that drew people in. A wide smile, sharp cheekbones, and the inherited confidence of a man who had never really wanted for anything. His father, Harold, had put him through a private college in the Midwest, then bankrolled the down payment for Brendan's first home. But by the time Brendan turned 38, the cracks were no longer hidden, they were gaping. He'd lost his real estate license after a string of financial mishaps and one questionable ethics complaint that never quite made it to court. He'd been through 2 marriages, both of which ended in court-ordered alimony payments he struggled to meet. He hadn't held stable employment in nearly 2 years. Yet despite everything, Harold never gave up on his son. He'd bailed Brendan out more than once, quietly with a banker's precision and a father's hope. But even patience has limits. In the weeks leading up to Harold's birthday, those close to the family noticed something strange. Brendan had started asking more direct questions about the estate, the house, the retirement accounts. He'd even asked Melanie half-jokingly if she thought Dad was going to leave him anything, or just a bill to bury him. Melanie brushed it off. That was Brendan's style, sarcastic, dry, brooding. But behind the sarcasm was something else: desperation. Detective Nora Jensen of the Edina Police Department was one of the first to dig into Brendan's financials. What she found was staggering. Nearly $80,000 in credit card debt, $14,000 behind on child support, 2 maxed-out personal loans, a lien on his 2014 BMW, 2 pending lawsuits, one from a former client, another from his second ex-wife. Brendan Kingsley, once the heir apparent, was financially circling the drain. And according to digital forensics, in the months before his father's death, he'd searched online for phrases like, "Can a disinherited son contest a will?" "Ways to overturn estate documents." "How do police determine time of death?" That last search was just 2 weeks before Harold died. During Harold's birthday celebration, Brendan had handed his father a standard white envelope. Inside wasn't a Hallmark greeting, but a printout of the revised will Brendan had somehow obtained, one that drastically reduced his share of the inheritance. Where he got it remains unclear. Speculation ranged from hacking Harold's emails to pressuring a former associate at the law firm handling the estate. But the envelope was real, and so was Brendan's reaction. Harold, surprised but calm, had reportedly slipped the envelope into the drawer of the side table and simply said, "We'll talk about it later." They never did. Initially, Brendan told detectives that he'd left the birthday party around 9:30 p.m. and gone straight home. He said he watched Netflix until midnight, then went to sleep. No one could verify this, he lived alone. But Brendan made one critical mistake. He left his iPhone's location data active. The logs showed his phone left the party house at 9:41 p.m., but instead of going home, it pinged near a gas station 5 miles away. Then it went dark for nearly 90 minutes. At 11:18 p.m., the phone reappeared on Harold's block. By 12:04 a.m., it was back at Brendan's condo. When confronted, Brendan claimed he'd just gone for a drive to clear his head. Detectives didn't buy it. Melanie was the first to suspect Brendan, though it broke her heart to say it. She told police during her second interview, "Brendan's always had issues. But I never thought he'd do this. Still, when I saw the safe open and Dad's will folder gone, I just knew." The investigation intensified. Detectives subpoenaed Brendan's bank records, reviewed surveillance footage from homes on Harold Street, and even brought in a forensic accountant. They discovered Brendan had made a cash deposit of $3,200 just 4 days after the murder. When asked where the money came from, Brendan stuttered through vague answers. He said he'd sold a watch, then a guitar, then finally claimed he borrowed it from a friend. Police could confirm none of it. 6 weeks after Harold's death, Brendan was arrested. The charges: first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and fraudulent concealment of a will. The prosecution's theory was chilling. Brendan had waited until his father was alone, entered the house using the hidden garage keypad code, confronted Harold in the den, and bludgeoned him with the brass bookend after a brief struggle. He'd then opened the safe, removed the latest will, and replaced it with an outdated version that heavily favored him. What he didn't count on: Harold had already emailed a scanned version of the updated will to his lawyer that very afternoon, with a timestamp and subject line, "Review this before I sign." It was more than enough to shatter Brendan's plan. The safe had never been touched. Not in years. Harold Kingsley kept it behind a sliding panel in his study wall, accessible only to those who knew its secret. So when detectives opened it after his death and found the newest version of his will missing, one thing became clear. The killer didn't just come to murder. They came to rewrite the future. Detective Nora Jensen returned to the Kingsley home on the third day of the investigation, just after the crime scene unit had cleared. Her goal was simple: confirm if the safe in Harold's study contained the most recent estate documents. It didn't. Inside the small, fireproof compartment were several items. A diamond-studded Rolex watch, an old, dusty revolver, a sealed envelope marked funeral instructions, and one manila folder labeled Last Will and Testament, March 2017. The problem? That wasn't the latest version. Harold's most recent will, dated January 2024, had been drafted and reviewed by his attorney and was pending formal notarization. It notably cut Brendan's inheritance by 70%, redirecting the majority to his daughter Melanie, and allocating a large portion to a local foundation for Alzheimer's research. The January will was gone. But the March 2017 version, the one where Brendan was still a co-beneficiary, had conveniently resurfaced. At the birthday party 2 nights before Harold's death, Brendan had handed his father an envelope. Several family members witnessed it, including Melanie and 2 cousins. Harold had opened it, his expression unreadable, and slipped the contents into a drawer beside his armchair. That drawer, when later opened by detectives, was empty. But based on witness statements, Brendan's envelope had contained either a printed draft or a photocopy of the 2024 will, something he should not have had access to. That was the moment things truly unraveled. Detectives subpoenaed Brendan's laptop, phone, and cloud storage. Forensic analysis revealed that 3 weeks prior to the murder, Brendan had downloaded a PDF file titled dad_latest will 24_draft.pdf from an email account belonging to simmonsparalegal@gmail.com, a temporary email registered anonymously just a month earlier. The IP address traced back to a public library in downtown Minneapolis. But it didn't stop there. In the weeks leading up to Harold's birthday, Brendan had also Googled how to replace a will without anyone knowing. How long does it take for police to determine a forged will? Safe manipulation without tools. Will inheritance be delayed if murder investigation is pending? The last query came just 48 hours before Harold's death. To Detective Jensen, it wasn't a digital breadcrumb trail. It was a confession typed in plain sight. The Kingsley family safe hadn't been tampered with in the traditional sense. No forced entry. No damaged dial. No scratches or markings suggesting prying tools. In fact, the only clear indicator that anything had changed was the document inside. This led investigators to 2 unsettling conclusions. The person who opened the safe either knew the combination or had seen it written down somewhere in the house. The person was careful, deliberate, and had time to remove only the one document that could sabotage their plan. But here's what sealed the suspicion. On Harold's desk, behind a stack of ledger books, was a sticky note with faded ink. Written on it were 4 digits. Those digits were the exact combination to the safe. And Brendan, who had lived in that house until 5 years prior, had always joked about how Dad couldn't remember anything without a post-it. Inside the safe, alongside the will, was an envelope labeled Funeral Instructions. What it contained shook Melanie to her core. In it, Harold had written a short paragraph, handwritten and dated just 10 days before his death. If anything ever happens to me unexpectedly, especially after my birthday, please make sure Brendan is investigated. I love my son, but I know when someone is cornered, they get dangerous. Harold had signed it at the bottom. The note wasn't legally binding, but it spoke volumes about his state of mind. He had felt something was off. He'd sensed danger within his own family. Harold's lawyer, Henry Kessler, became a key witness in the investigation. He told authorities that just days before his death, Harold had seemed uneasy, distracted even. During a scheduled estate planning call, Harold reportedly said, "I need to get this thing locked down before Brendan starts asking questions. He's going to be upset." Kessler also confirmed that Brendan had never been copied on any version of the new will and had no authorized access to the firm's digital database. If Brendan had a copy, it was stolen or leaked. As news of the investigation spread, extended family and close friends began to take sides. Melanie stood firm. She told reporters outside the courthouse, "Brendan didn't just kill our father. He tried to erase his wishes. He tried to steal his legacy." Others were hesitant to believe it. Brendan had been struggling, yes, but murder? Forgery? Still, the evidence was damning. Too many coincidences. Too many signs pointing in only one direction. Brendan's defense attorney argued that he had simply found a version of the will in a drawer and didn't know it was outdated. That he panicked after Harold's death and had no role in it. But the prosecutors weren't buying it. And neither was the public. During the pretrial hearing, Brendan's calm facade finally cracked. Presented with the forensic evidence, the email trail, and the safe combination note, Brendan reportedly slumped forward at the defense table and whispered, "I never meant to hurt him." That confession wasn't admissible, yet. But it changed the tone of the case. Because now it wasn't just about a missing will. It was about a father who saw the end coming, and a son who refused to walk away empty-handed. When Melanie Kingsley took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Not because she was the grieving daughter, but because she was the only one who dared say what no one else would. "My brother killed our father. And if I stay silent, I become his accomplice." By the time Brendan Kingsley was formally charged with first-degree murder and fraud, the once proud Kingsley name had become synonymous with scandal. The family's legacy, built on generations of real estate, philanthropy, and local prominence, was reduced to whispered gossip and newspaper headlines. Elmwood Falls was a town of fewer than 30,000 people. It was the kind of place where everyone knew someone who'd been helped by Harold Kingsley. He'd funded scholarships, built playgrounds, paid for church roofs. But now, his son stood accused of suffocating him in his own living room over a revised will and a missing fortune. The town didn't know which Kingsley to believe, and the courtroom became the battleground for that answer. The prosecution built a compelling narrative. Brendan was financially drowning. He had learned about the 2024 will, which cut his inheritance. He had the motive, opportunity, and digital trail to suggest premeditation. And he handed Harold an envelope at the birthday party, the last known time Harold was seen alive by multiple people. But it wasn't enough to just present the facts. They needed Melanie to humanize the case, to explain to the jury not just what Brendan did, but who he had become. Wearing a black blazer and holding back tears, Melanie sat across from the jury and told them about her father's final year of life. She spoke softly at first. "My dad loved Brendan more than he loved himself. Even when Brendan stole from the company, Dad covered it. Even when he dropped out of college, Dad still sent him money. But when Brendan found out he was being cut out of the will, everything changed." The courtroom was silent. Melanie continued, her voice cracking. "I begged Dad to move the will to the bank. He kept saying, Brendan wouldn't do something like that. He's my son." He didn't want to believe his own child could betray him. The defense objected to the characterization. The judge overruled. Melanie looked directly at Brendan, seated just 15 feet away. "I don't want to be here. I never thought I'd testify against my own brother. But if I don't, my father's death gets rewritten into a lie." That line struck deep. Even a few jury members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Brendan's attorney, Lou Raymond, painted a vastly different picture. He described Brendan as the forgotten child, always living in Melanie's shadow. He suggested Harold had emotionally neglected his son, leading to resentment, not violence. "This is a case of grief colliding with assumption," Raymond said. "There is no hard evidence Brendan killed his father. No prints. No weapon. Just a theory built on financial tension and a family's internal politics." To drive that point home, they called Brendan's ex-girlfriend to the stand, who claimed he was deeply shaken by Harold's death. "He cried for days," she said. "I honestly think he blamed himself for not calling more, not visiting enough. But murder? Never." It almost worked. Until the prosecution showed the deleted draft of the forged will recovered from Brendan's laptop trash folder. It had his formatting style, his phrasing, and even a mistyped word he was known to repeat: accommodate instead of accommodate. What turned the tide wasn't the documents or the testimony. It was Melanie's cross-examination rebuttal. When asked by the defense whether she had any proof her brother murdered Harold, she said, "No, I don't have video footage. But I have something better. A timeline that only works if Brendan was lying." She then explained. Brendan claimed he left the party by 9:15 p.m. A neighbor's Ring camera captured Harold turning off the porch light at 10:07 p.m., a routine he never skipped. Yet, by 10:20, his pacemaker data showed erratic heartbeat patterns consistent with suffocation. Brendan's phone had been offline between 9:20 and 10:40 p.m., an unusual window. And most damning of all, Dad always locked his front door when he went to bed. There was no sign of forced entry. That means whoever killed him either had a key or was already inside. Outside the courthouse, crowds began gathering each trial day. Protesters held signs reading, "Justice for Harold. Greed isn't family. Trust fund doesn't mean trust." Others, still loyal to Brendan, shouted, "Where's the weapon? Melanie's lying for the money." Fights broke out. Reporters swarmed. And the Kingsley family name became fodder for national morning shows and true crime podcasts. On the final day before jury deliberation, Melanie asked to speak with Brendan privately. They met in the visitor's room, separated by reinforced glass. Melanie's voice trembled as she picked up the phone. "Why, Brendan? Why couldn't you just walk away?" He stared at her, hollow-eyed, silent. Then finally he whispered, "Because I had nothing left. You had the business. You had Dad's love. All I had was the future he promised me, and then he took that too." Melanie replied coldly, "You didn't just kill Dad. You made sure he'd never be remembered for who he was. You made his final chapter about you." Brendan looked down. No denial. No apology. Just silence. As the jury began deliberation, the town of Elmwood Falls held its breath. Would justice be served? Or would a wealthy last name, some circumstantial evidence, and the fog of grief blur the truth beyond reach? Melanie sat outside the courthouse with her husband, watching leaves fall gently from the courthouse lawn's trees, reminding her that some seasons end not with peace but with ruin. He killed his father the night after his birthday. The same man who had clothed him, raised him, and, ironically, left him everything. But what Brendan Kingsley didn't know was that Harold had one more gift for him, and it would come back to haunt him from beyond the grave. Brendan Kingsley didn't leave immediately after killing his father. He stayed, sat there, breathing heavily in the dark, the hammer still in his hand, his thoughts unraveling in jagged, chaotic loops. Blood had pooled beneath the recliner. His father's last breath had been short, wheezy, almost like a snore. But Brendan wasn't crying. He wasn't panicked. He was calculating. He stood, wiped the hammer clean with an old dish rag and placed it in the dishwasher. Something so absurdly normal it would seem ridiculous later. Then he went back into the den and rearranged the room. He even turned off the floor lamp, just like his dad did every night before bed. Brendan had done his research. A robbery would look forced. A break-in would raise red flags. But a fall? A stroke? Something that wouldn't lead to an autopsy? That would buy him time. The next morning, Brendan called 911. "I found my father unconscious in his chair. He's not breathing." The dispatcher guided him through CPR, but of course it was useless. Harold Kingsley had been dead for hours. Paramedics arrived. Then police. There were no visible signs of trauma at first glance. No blood in plain view. The wound was hidden beneath the collar of his shirt. A single strike to the base of the skull. Neat. Almost professional. But the gift Brendan hadn't counted on was the one his father had left behind. Brendan had searched the den, the safe in the office, and even the fireproof box under the bed. But one thing he couldn't find was the most recent will. The old one, dated 5 years ago, left everything to both children, Brendan and his older sister, Eliza. But Harold had been hinting at changes. In private conversations with his attorney, he had started to question Brendan's trustworthiness. The bailouts, the overdoses, the missing money. At one point, Harold even joked that Brendan loved him more dead than alive. And Brendan didn't know it yet, but Harold had recorded that exact statement during a call with his estate lawyer. Harold Kingsley wasn't just generous. He was meticulous. He documented everything: calls, expenses, suspicions. His home office was a labyrinth of labeled file folders and flash drives. His lawyer, Raymond Duval, knew Harold had grown increasingly suspicious of Brendan in the months before his death. 3 weeks before the murder, Harold sent Raymond an updated will via encrypted email. In it, Brendan's inheritance was placed in a trust, requiring drug tests and financial oversight. If Harold died suddenly, the trust would not activate until an independent forensic audit was conducted. Harold even left a video recording, stored in a safety deposit box under Eliza's name. 2 days after Harold's death, Raymond Duval contacted Eliza and disclosed the existence of the video. In it, Harold stared directly into the camera, his voice calm, his eyes tired. "If you're watching this, I'm gone. And if I died suddenly, without illness or accident, please know I did not go willingly. Brendan, if you're seeing this, I pray you didn't do what I feared. But if you did, then know I left breadcrumbs." That video, combined with the autopsy, which confirmed blunt force trauma to the skull, shattered Brendan's entire alibi. While the police were still officially considering the death undetermined, Brendan began to unravel. He drank. He ranted. He even called Eliza in a drunken fit, accusing her of manipulating their father. Then came the mistake. Brendan attempted to access the updated will through his father's email account. He tried 3 password combinations. On the 3rd attempt, the system auto-locked and alerted the estate attorney. Within hours, the police had a warrant to search Brendan's apartment. They found the hammer, not in the dishwasher where he'd left it, but in his bedroom closet. Despite his attempt to clean it, luminol testing revealed traces of blood under the head. DNA confirmed it belonged to Harold Kingsley. A gray hoodie worn that night still carried a faint smear of blood on the sleeve cuff. But perhaps the most damning evidence was psychological. Investigators discovered a notebook filled with resentful, violent entries. He dangles money like it's a leash. I'm sick of being the screw-up. I'm the one who stayed, why should she get half? The she referred to Eliza. Before his arrest, Brendan tried to flee. Police tracked him to a motel 2 towns over. He had $4,200 in cash, a fake ID, and a suitcase full of clothes. It wasn't just an escape, it was an admission. He was arrested on charges of first-degree murder, obstruction, and attempted fraud. As Brendan sat in the back of the police cruiser, cuffed and silent, his eyes locked on the courthouse steps. It was the same building his father once walked into with pride as a civic donor. Now Brendan would walk into it in chains. Harold Kingsley gave Brendan everything, every second chance, every loan, every ounce of trust. But his final gift wasn't money or property. It was justice, left behind like a trapdoor, waiting to catch the one person he feared might betray him. And that fear had come true. The same living room where Brendan once celebrated birthdays, watched cartoons, and unwrapped Christmas presents, became the courtroom in his mind. Because even though the legal trial happened elsewhere, the true judgment unfolded in the heart of the family he destroyed. On a cloudy Monday morning, 6 months after the murder of Harold Kingsley, the state versus Brendan Kingsley opened in a packed courtroom. The case had captured regional attention, not just for the brutality of the crime, but for its stark betrayal. A son accused of murdering the very father who'd rescued him time and time again. The prosecution painted Brendan as the ultimate parasite, privileged, enabled, and pathologically entitled. Assistant DA Monica Trent's opening statement was razor-sharp. This was not a crime of desperation. It was a calculated erasure of the man who stood in the way of unearned wealth. She walked the jury through a narrative of decay, financial ruin, narcissism, entitlement, and finally, cold-blooded murder. Eliza Kingsley's appearance in court was quiet but commanding. Her voice trembled at first as she recounted her father's unease in the months before his death. The change in Brendan's tone, the veiled threats, the outbursts during family dinners. Dad never told me he thought Brendan would hurt him. But he did say more than once, if anything ever happens to me, make sure you check everything. That's not something a father says lightly. When Monica Trent asked her how it felt to testify against her brother, Eliza broke down. The room fell silent. I wish I wasn't, but I also wish my father were still alive. Brendan's attorney, Martin Feldman, leaned heavily into the lack of eyewitnesses and the seemingly circumstantial nature of the evidence. He claimed the hammer had been in the home for years. He argued that the bruising could have come from a fall. But it all began to unravel when a forensic audio expert authenticated Harold Kingsley's recorded message. The jury watched the video in pin-drop silence. Harold's tired face appeared on the screen. Brendan, if you're watching this, I hope I'm wrong. But if I'm not, then know you took something from this world it cannot replace. And I left enough behind to speak for me. It was damning. Not just legally but morally. The final blow came during rebuttal. A jailhouse phone call between Brendan and his girlfriend had been recorded. In it, Brendan lashed out at Eliza saying, she always had him wrapped around her finger. Now she gets the house, the business, and the sob story. I'm the villain. But maybe I always was. Those words sealed his fate. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty. On all counts, first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, attempted fraud. Brendan's expression didn't change. No tears. No outbursts. Just a long, heavy blink. Eliza, sitting behind the prosecution's table, quietly closed her eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just breathed, for the first time in what felt like a year. Judge Karen Douglas didn't mince words during sentencing. Mr. Kingsley, you had every opportunity. You had love. You had privilege. You had forgiveness. What you lacked was gratitude. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the trial, Eliza returned to her childhood home. The blood had long been scrubbed away. The recliner was gone. But the ache lingered in the walls, the floorboards, the ghostly quiet of a place where everything once felt safe. She opened the last gift her father had bought for Brendan, a wrapped box that had sat untouched in a closet since his birthday. Inside was a framed photo of the three of them, taken in 2002 during a family trip to Lake George. On the back was Harold's handwriting. "No matter what you do, you'll always be my son. But love without respect dies quietly." Eliza left the photo on the mantel, a silent eulogy. The Kingsley family name would forever carry a stain. But Harold's story, his foresight, his caution, his last desperate attempt to protect even the son who betrayed him, remained a testament to both paternal love and tragic foresight. Brendan got what he wanted: control. The house. The money. But only for a moment. Because in the end, what he inherited was not just the estate. He inherited the blame. The shame. The legacy of a bloodline betrayal so complete, it left no survivors in spirit. And in a cruel twist of fate, Harold's final gift had indeed been death. But not just his own. It was the death of a family. Forever. As the gavel fell and the cell door closed, one thing became clear: greed doesn't just take money. It takes lives. It takes families. And sometimes, it wears the face of someone you've known your whole life. If this case chills you to the bone, don't forget to subscribe and like for more shocking true crime stories that reveal just how close evil can truly be. Tell us, was justice truly served? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.